Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as cEDH. I am one of your hosts, Lyndon, also known as Noobzors, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Matt, aka Null.
What's up, everyone?
Reed, aka Sick Robot.
Hey, what's up?
And Morgan, aka Spleenface.
How's it going?
In this episode, we're going to be covering the speed of the format that is cEDH. How fast is it? What turn is the fundamental turn? What does that even mean to talk about the speed of a format? But before we get into that, what have you guys been up to since the last episode?
Well, I, for one, have been demonstrating the dominance of the deck that I play.
Dude,
in
regale
our
us.
local. So, as you who listen to the podcast might know, especially those of you who live in good old-fashioned Toronto, great city, we have...
Shout out to the Six.
Yeah. We have cEDH nights on Thursdays, which happens to be yesterday because we're recording this on a Friday. So we got some games in, which was me, Morgan, and Matt. We're all there, hanging out. First game of the night. Unfortunately, I had to mulligan my first hand, which was not great. I had to mulligan my second hand because it had no lands and was also not great. My 6 was fine, except for the fact that it had both a Kozilek and a Nomad's Encore in it, and no gas.
So that's basically a 4.
So
already.
that was basically a 5, and then that 5 was basically a 4. So, needless to say, mulligan to 4. Not great. Immediately, as soon as Morgan realized this, his immediate quote, and I do quote, "Guys, we cannot let Reed win this game, because that would be terrible." I'm tacking on the because that would be terrible, because it would be terrible to let somebody win on a mulligan to 4.
Off a mull to 4, yeah.
Legitimately terrible. That being said, I wanted a multi-4, so not
Dude,
bad.
You took the longest and deepest dab on Morgan.
It was great.
It was definitely a long game.
Also, I didn't mention this to Lyndon when we were discussing this in pre-show, but I did in fact win that game on 1 life. And I won the 1 in 3 for the Vile Smasher player to resolve a Vile Smasher trigger to kill me.
Oh hell yeah. Dude, you gotta get the lucky rub-ins.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, dude. First, you have to get unlucky by mulling to 4
Yep.
because
and losing
yeah.
literally every single crit roll the entire game.
Well,
That one too.
sounds like
And he
it
had
was
7
fun.
counter backup.
Sounds like it was fun for the whole family. Oh,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
ahead. I was
No, go
gonna say this is one that actually includes Morgan, Matt, and myself. We went to our friend's wedding and his bachelor party, so that was sick.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. He doesn't play Magic yet until he receives his gift. No, I'm just kidding.
Dude, we hook him up with
We
the
did try.
commander.
We did try.
No, and then also, this is actually really exciting. I've met up with some guys who were interested in playing cEDH, who I met from the subreddit, the cEDH subreddit, and found out that they lived really close. And we're starting like a regular cEDH night once a week, close to me, just outside of Toronto.
A
And
small rural community of Guelph.
yeah, and the guys are super sick. So I know they're going to be listening to this. So props to Mark and Derek and Chris. You guys are sick. Good games. Look forward to playing more with you guys. Yeah, anything else you guys want to share?
Sure. So cEDH night yesterday was not my night. I didn't draw a land in my first 20-ish draw steps of the night. But I did go to the 2v2 tournament, the monthly one that we've mentioned before.
I think we mentioned it every episode.
Every episode.
Literally every
Every
episode.
second episode.
There is not an episode that goes by without being mentioned.
And me and my partner, Tom, friend of the podcast, took Teferi, Time Raveler, and Kess Consultation. And the only game we lost was the game where I shuffled my wish board into my deck by mistake and was issued a game loss. But apart from that, did pretty well.
Yeah, we've already said enough about how Teferi is busted in that format. I think they're
Technically,
done.
I
With
It's
the whole
gone.
experiment,
It's
yeah.
gone. We got it. We don't have to deal with it anymore.
Even though we weren't the ones dealing with it, we were forcing other people to deal with it. No one else played Teferi besides you and Matt, or me and my partner Dave. But yeah, okay. I think that's good. Unless Matt, you had anything you want to?
No, nothing really. Just still on the Opus Thief grind, looking to spice it up a bit.
Hey, you
Maybe
got
tune
a
it to the meta a bit more.
webcam, my friend.
Dude.
I did get a webcam. It's still in the box. I do have a weekend, which is this weekend, so we'll be opening it
God.
up.
Is Matt gonna
Breaking that in.
have bought a webcam, have it shipped to him, and then set it up before I set up my webcam that I already own?
Oh
no.
That's embarrassing.
Kind of sounds like it.
Dude, and it's not even I've had this sitting on my desk for like maybe 3 weeks now.
I've had that webcam sitting on my table for about 6 months now.
Yikes. Yeah, dude. Everyone who's listening, go check out PlayEDH, the Discord. Jam some webcam games. You'll find Morgan, Matt, and you'll find Morgan and I, and then maybe Matt, and who knows about Reed? It could be
Eventually.
another 6 months.
Trust me, I'll get there at some point.
And then you'll start playing on the ranked ladder and
He's
grinding
definitely
all the noobs
on
for
the
points.
server.
I'm on the.
That's the first step.
I've been on the server.
Okay, well, without further ado, let's get into housekeeping, because there is some awesome stuff that we'd like to talk about, which is our new patrons.
Holy moly!
Congrats to new patrons.
No, like, yeah,
Sorry, I
seriously,
thought Matt was about to say
it's awesome the amount of
congrats
support
to us,
that you guys are giving, and we really appreciate it. We bought our mics using the patron money to pay that off, and hopefully pay our editor
At some point.
Yeah, that's definitely it helps a lot. So, in no particular order, I'd like to give a shout out to Brian,
Derek M,
Thomas S.
Tesmata.
Justin D,
and of course Keel.
Kale,
Keel. I'm gonna
Is it
go with
Kale?
Keel. I'm gonna go with Keel. That's my bet.
Keil. Everyone, it's 4 letters, and we're at a loss. So
But
Tell
we
us-
seriously
We
appreciate
do.
it.
yeah, we really do.
I'm continuously surprised by the support the community gives us. Thank you guys so much. Could not ask for a better community, to be completely honest.
Yeah, come on the Discord and on our Discord and take advantage of your patron rewards and talk in your private channels and get listener questions ahead of everyone else.
We also
Do all that.
we do have actual factual physical copies of Into the North now, which are primed and ready for being sent out. to all
Gotta work
those.
on my signature, man.
Gotta start practicing.
Yeah, don't practice on the card, please.
I feel like I need to work on my handwriting more than my signature.
Dude, let's all just print our names in like the most,
Blocky,
garbage. Yeah.
dude, bubble letters.
I need a stamp. Somebody get me a stamp.
Word art.
Yeah. Awesome. So then, yeah, let's move on to new developments. And there's actually some pretty good ones here. Reed, why don't you kick things off
Yeah,
with this?
there's a great one. So for those of you who have been in the cEDH community for at least a bit now, or have maybe entered the cEDH community recently, or any time in like the past year, you might have heard about a resource called the cEDH Decklist Database, which was a initiative started by Average Dragon of the cEDH Discord and subreddit, and it is a cEDH resource primarily for players who are just starting to get into the format to get a snapshot cross section of what the cEDH meta looks like. It's a great resource for having access to a bunch of the most well played and most popular lists in the format. It's awesome just for, I know I use it all the time for brewing, for just like looking through and making sure that like I know what lists are up to date. It's great. It's pretty extensive too. There's a lot on there, and there's more being added all the time. got a facelift. Average put in a lot of work to get its own dedicated website, so you don't have to sift through the god-awful interface on Google Sheets anymore. It's beautiful, well-designed, got some UI done. Went through multiple iterations to make it look nice. It has filtering now. You can search it correctly with search boxes. There's tags. There's linked primers and linked Discord. It's great. You guys should check it out.
But
We'll have a
Reed,
link
when
to that
will
in the,
my deck
yes.
be added to the database? I have a submission.
So, speaking of such, Average has also brought on, and I will disclose that I am part of this group, so, fair play. I am shilling this because I believe in the resource. But Average has brought on a group of editors as well, including myself, including Average himself, Maynard Ferguson, Wedge, not of the Mana Source of cEDH Discord fame, ASM, and
I love that that's his that Wedge from the Mana Source as also born Wedge not from Mana Source.
and
Yeah,
Sagandaraja.
that's great.
Sagandaraja, I Sug, come on, man.
Sug, yeah.
Just tell me. Just give me the fucking description. All right. But yeah, great. So pretty much triple the size of the editing and maintenance team. So we're getting through and trying to make sure that people's submissions are being reviewed and making sure that they're either getting added or getting responses to and all that stuff. So make sure to check it out. If you maybe notice a missing segment on there or a missing deck or anything like that, or you notice something wrong, be sure to let us know. We have a Discord now for the cEDH decklist database that you guys can come to and let us know, talk about the database, all that good stuff. Yeah, check it out.
Link for
And
that
now-
will be in the description for the podcast.
It now has Parentoothie.
It does.
Dude, Parentoothie's not bad.
The deck's actually pretty legit. I was
Yeah.
originally I didn't know about the flicker interaction, and then I learned the flicker interaction.
it's disgusting.
And I was like, oh, this is
Absolutely
actually
disgusting.
pretty great. Dude,
Yeah, I was experimenting in a no ban list or very, very restricted ban list format, and played a game with someone who was playing a Parentoothie deck, and it was not bad. Yeah, and so we've got one more thing on new developments, and that's M20. Morgan, you want to talk about M20 a bit?
Yeah, sure. So it was we recorded a full on set review, but
Yeah, we
then
did.
there was a bit of an event that happened in early July. If you are alive, and play this format, you probably noticed it. So that episode got a little scrapped. We got a couple interesting new commanders in the form of Yarok and Kikar, and no one else. And we got a couple of interesting tech cards. Veil of Summer is stupid. The card's real good.
great.
Ooh, that's some hot tamale.
And then there's some spicier tech choices like Tail's End and Fry.
And that's about
And
it.
Virtus the Veiled is an interesting alternate reanimator target in decks that are running a few of those.
Cool.
Oh,
See,
there was also a 5-color something.
A thing, yeah. One of those things.
I'll just let that slide. I won't address it. But it's
Don't
kind
play
of-
Golos.
Please don't play Golos.
There's this new Scout tribal deck you can play.
Oh my god. Sheep tribal all over again. For anyone who's wondering, we in university we did a little league where we did a tribal league, and Matt decided he'd play sheep tribal, which was literally only Nick Fleece Ram.
A large portion of the available sheep in Magic.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay, so let's get into the meat and potatoes of the episode, and that's talking about the speed of cEDH. Now, what does that mean? Is that like the pervasive meme that many casual players and cEDH naysayers will say that, oh my god, why would I play cEDH? Everyone just combos out on turn 2, or
Game's always over by turn 3.
yeah, exactly. It's always that way, or these games last only 20 minutes. Just everyone's race to the bottom, trying to combo first.
Interaction? What's that?
Yes, is that really how you define the speed of a format. Morgan, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. I think that the speed at which so when we talk about the speed of a format, no. But I think that the more accurate statement is cEDH is a turn 3 format, or turn 3 is the fundamental turn. And so what that means is decks can start consistently winning by turn 3, and you have to build your deck to respect the fact that decks can start to win reasonably consistently by turn 3. So that doesn't mean that the games will always win on turn 3, because people interact and try and stop you from actually achieving that. But if everyone was playing such that they were tapping out on turn 3 for, like, Harmonize, a lot of games would end on turn 3.
And
Yeah, I think
it's not even. Sorry,
Okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
it's not even, and like I don't think it's even necessarily that like, even that everybody at the table can threaten to win on turn 3. It's just that turn 3 is usually the turn where at least one deck at the table will be able to threaten to win, right?
If they want
Yes,
to.
which is a pretty important distinction, right? Because it's not saying
Yes.
that every deck at the table will always be able to threaten the turn 3 win if they wanted to. It's saying that there's a very, very good chance that one deck at the table at least will be able to do that.
I think
I'd even say that, like, in a balanced, like, cEDH pod that consists of 4 decks that represent the metagame well, that you'll see at least 1 or 2 decks that are ready to go off early. That don't necessarily choose to, but are certainly ready.
sort of how I view it is that in the turns preceding the fundamental turn of the format, which obviously the fundamental turn is something that changes depending on the format. Modern is notoriously a turn 4 format.
Allegedly.
But that's allegedly. But for me, and how I kind of view it in cEDH is that the turns preceding the fundamental turn sort of have an established play pattern that everyone kind of routinely follows along with, and then that's sort of when you start to diverge, and I'll kind of elaborate on that. So turn 1 is ramp, and I mean, if you're in like mono blue or mono black or some colors where you can't have consistent turn 1 ramp, that doesn't necessarily change the fact that that is what the majority of cEDH decks are trying to do on turn 1. That's hit your mana dorks or your carpet of flowers, or do something like a Mystic Remora, which is preying on the fact that people are trying to develop their mana on turn 1. Turn 2 follows I would call this like a development stage where people are developing their game plan. So they're either establishing some strong value engines like Timna's, Sylvan Libraries, or they're tutoring proactively for cards with Demonic Tutor to advance their combo plan, or for protection or setup. It is turn 2 is the setup turn for the most part. And people will sometimes, if you're trying to do something like in Gitrog with the 5-cost commander, you'll sometimes further develop your mana, but that's what you're doing. And then turn 3 is where things start, this sort of consistent pattern starts to break down, where some people who are doing their tutoring are now going to try to, or could be threatening to combo. Some people who did, their turn 2 talisman or signet are just going to be holding up counter magic. And turn 3, this is kind of where you get into stalemates, and this is where things really get interesting. At least that's how I kind of view it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's a great description, or a great way of introducing thinking about a turn X format, or specifically the cEDH being a turn 3. I would say that I'd kind of I'd change the third turn a bit, and I'd pretty much say it's when players choose it's when players choose to either interact with the decks that have best developed their mana or developed their resources, or sit back, look at people, and then try to combo.
Yeah, it's definitely something where turn 3, if you're a deck like Gitrog or a non-blue deck, you're often trying to take advantage of the fact that other people are going to have this expectation that people could be trying to threaten a combo. And I think a lot of this could be due to sort of Flash and the way that it sort of affects the format and enforces sort of negative, or encourages these like negative play patterns of, you can threaten interaction for, you can hold up a 1 and a blue and threaten a delay while also threatening your win. So people have a hard time, and this causes like a weird stalemate where, most decks outside of Flash, most combos are pretty obvious that they're being set up. You require some sort of obvious tutor to be cast, and it can't win at instant speed, so you can kind of see it coming. And otherwise it requires like the Stone Cold Nuts to combo off. But yeah, so if you're a deck like Gitrog or a non-blue deck, you're trying to do things on turn 3 that are very proactive to your game plan. Like turn 3, a lot of the 5-drop commanders are built around casting their commander on turn 3 very consistently. And that's to get your value engine online, and then also to threaten combos. So every deck has a fundamental thing that they want to be doing on turn 3, and it is dependent on everyone else in the pod.
Usually, yeah.
And I think,
and that's also sort of where Flash starts to break things, right? Where like, Flash starts to be like, your pivotal turn becomes turn 2 more consistently.
Yeah, and that
format, which sort of
interferes.
It throws the whole thing off.
Well, I think another one of the sort of unhealthy things that, not that I want to make this whole episode about Flash, but one of the things that Flash has also done that sort of indirectly exacerbates that is, it's made turn order like even more significant, because if, for example, the Flash Hook player is going first, like now there's a lot of pressure on people on turn 2 for them to not tap out for the Flash Hook player's turn 3. So it actually allows you to pressure what normally is a safe development turn based on seeding order. Or a safer development term.
One of the other things too about turn 3 in cEDH is that, I'm just piggybacking off what you were saying with turn order, is that if everyone has some kind of thing that they can do proactively to develop their game plan on turn 3 if they wanted to, and it's typically considered a greedy play, right? So if you wanted to tap out for Zur on turn 3, tap out for Kess turn 3, tap out for, obviously you're going to tap out for Gitrog turn 3 because you're not going to be threatening interaction. But, you tap, play out, run out your Tymna or your Thrasios. These sorts of things are, you can kind of pass the buck on to the next player depending on where you're seated in turn order. And what you were saying with Flash sort of breaking this kind of paradigm, you kind of lose the ability to pass the buck, because you can't risk it, right? If you're going first and you've got you have the option to cast a turn 3 Zur or a turn 3 Kess, because you just want to kind of get that nice development established, and then have your turn 4, you can be threatening interaction and advancing your game plan without breaking too much sweat. That's fine, but you do pass, like, so if for instance, if we're saying it's Zur in seat 1 taps out for a turn 1 Zur, the players 2 and 3 and 4 are going to be kind of looking at each other saying, okay, well, we've got to deal with this. It's something that you need to be aware of, and passing the buck to the next player is something that you just can you can't get away with Flash in the format.
And not necessarily like it was something that you could get away with consistently beforehand. I just from personal experience, having played Hackball, the deck tends to want to stick Momir turn 3 a lot, and it's not always safe, and I'm sure noobs, you have the same experience, like even without Flash in the pod.
Yeah.
But now there's just a lot higher chance that you die, and it's a lot less dependent on turn order for tapping out, which is basically what Spleen and Noobs were both saying there.
Yeah, if you were to get rid of Flash, I think it's actually kind of reasonable that you might. I wouldn't say it advances the fundamental turn of the format to another, like all the way up to 4, right? I don't think you go turn 1. You don't get your turn 1 ramp, turn 2 development, then turn 3 further development, then turn 4. You kind of got to be ready.
It resets it to a
because
softer turn 3 though, as opposed to like
like a 3.5.
A lot of the turn 3s would require a lot more obvious development.
Yes, that too.
Like, when Kess can turn 3 or whatever, they opened Land Soaring Signet, and then you went, okay, I guess we have to respect this turn 3 win, but you see that. Whereas with Flash Hulk, they could go land Dork, land Sylvan Library, end step tutor, win.
Yeah, it's right. I think I was a bit rambly with my thing about passing the buck. I'll just try to make it a bit more clear and concise, so that if you were to get rid of Flash and everyone was sort of taking on this turn 3 as a further development, it's not a necessarily sustainable play pattern, because the people in the early seats get their turn 4 before you get your turn 4, where you can hold up your interaction, quote unquote, right? Like, so the Zur player taps out for Zur on turn 3, and then if you're also developing, if the player 2, 3, and 4 are doing their development on turn 3 as well, then the Zur player untaps and wins uncontested. So that's why it wouldn't go all the way up to turn 4, because many of these decks do have consistent turn 4 wins. But the turn 3.5, where some people can get away with going further into development, and then you maybe get a bit of a stalemate going on with interaction, everyone checking each other's win attempts.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Like, where you can just much more accurately judge whether or not turn 3 is safe for development.
Yeah, so in terms of fast decks in a format, so it's not, because there's fast decks and there's slow decks and mid-range decks, and while everyone is prepared to interact on turn 3 and the decks are built around this fundamental turn, Muldrotha, I mean, digging Morgan's favorite pet deck, but not necessarily a tier one deck.
Low blow.
You take that back.
Low blow.
Muldrotha's good for creating examples. That's what Lynn's trying to say.
Yeah. Muldrotha is not going to be threatening a turn 3 win. Muldrotha is definitely trying to take advantage of that development phase. So it's not a fast deck, right? And all the decks that are built around turn 3, doing something on turn 3, either interacting or developing or going for the win, you can still, they're not all fast decks just because the format is quote unquote fast, right? Muldrotha is a slow, grindy deck. It's going to grind you out. That's how it's going to win. It's going to slam Azur's Weirding with counter backup, and then everyone is going to cry because they're never going to draw a good card ever again.
It's going to slam it.
But Muldrotha can win on turn 1. What do you mean it's not fast?
It's going to slam an Ashiok and just down take it on itself until you want to just die.
Exactly. So there are decks that do, pride themselves on being fast decks, but it's fast relative to the rest of the format, right? Because it's hard to be in an objective, because some of the slower, grindier decks would be fast by mid power standards, or by modern standards, or
every single one of them.
Yeah,
maybe exactly not Yisan.
Dude, Yisan with LED,
yeah, so
just get there. Continue.
It's what is what makes a fast deck is when it is planning to try to win the game, right? So that there is a fundamental turn in the format, and then there's when you're trying to win the game. And these are different concepts to kind of wrap your head around. And what marks a fast deck is where that turn they're trying to win the game, where that is positioned relative to the fundamental turn. So if you are trying to consistently put out turn 3 wins or threaten wins on turn 3, and you're not looking to develop or try to take things super long, you're a fast deck. And in order to get away with that, you need to have we can kind of slowly creep into this topic, but a metric that people use for trying to measure the speed and when this kind of win threatening turn falls is the deck's Goldfish, which, you know, I'm sure everyone listening knows what goldfishing is, but the idea being that it's a term that was you're playing against your pet goldfish, right? You've got your 60 cards or 100 cards, and you're just drawing hands and playing cards out and seeing how fast it takes to win the game. So that's kind of what we use as like an objective standard, quote unquote objective standard, to figure out how fast you can possibly go and how consistently you can do it. Flash Hulk, Hermit Druid decks, those are fast decks. They can consistently threaten their win very early.
Well, they're fast decks on the Goldfish.
Yes.
Are they fast decks in reality? Like
that's an interesting topic to get into.
I would say probably the fastest deck from a play pattern perspective that's like a substantial share of the meta is Food Chain at this point. Like, that's a deck that is looking to win early and not extend the game. Like, it doesn't have the equivalent of the turn 1 land Dork, turn 2 land Timna plan that a lot of Hulk decks.
I think
that's their frequent play pattern.
I suppose
you're saying it's a deck that it's a deck that
needs to threaten,
is trying to win by turn 3, but then actually accomplishes that rather than actually accomplishes that in a real game rather than just at a Goldfish.
Yeah, like the game plan when you sit down with that deck is to win on turn 3 or turn 4.
And your odds of winning the game significantly diminish every turn beyond your win, the time beyond the early turns when you're trying to really aggressively push for the win. Like first sliver does not have the same grind capabilities as something like Thrasios Timna or Gitrog Muldrotha isn't pretending to be a fast deck. But Gitrog, people you can Goldfish Gitrog. It's not close to the fastest decks in the format, but it's a relatively fast combo deck. But it's got a solid grind option by just casting the Gitrog monster and riding off your draw triggers. First Sliver does not have something like that. So I think it's an interesting point you bring out, is if you have that kind of backup plan and you don't hate going into that, are you still a fast deck?
You just slow down by default because you're just like,
is that what kind of defines a mid-range deck?
I think less analogous than mid-range is the concept of tempo. Like where you play just enough.
That's such a nebulous term in this format. It's so hard to justify.
So tempo. what I mean by tempo is, rather than playing, so mid-range plays slightly heavier threats, I would say, than fast decks or aggressive decks.
It goes over aggro.
Whereas I would say tempo plays a small, like a low to the ground threat, and then looks to be more disruptive. And like an aggressive deck just looks to play its threats as fast as possible. A mid-range deck plays slightly like heavier threats, and then a tempo deck has a smaller number of fast threats and more disruption. And if you look at cEDH lists, there's a lot of reactive instance in them.
Perhaps it'd be instructive to list some decks that are commonly understood to be fast decks, or decks that are just trying to form this linear game plan of trying to win as fast as possible, and their odds get diminished every turn beyond that term they're trying to win.
So we'll talk
So-
linear fast decks, I think, right?
Yeah. Well, let's pretend it's 2017.
Oh,
And
maybe
Selvala and
2016,
Grenzo
2016.
are on top
Bring it
of the
back a
world.
bit.
Yeah, so Grenzo, cast your Grenzo turn 1 or 2, resolve a Doomsday, activate Grenzo, win the game.
Count to 5. Let's
That's
go,
your goal.
baby.
And you have garbage, absolutely garbage card quality generally, and almost no grind.
You pretty much get 2 shots at your Doomsday, right? Because it's Doomsday and then that one card that can bring it back.
Yeah, you get exactly. Oh, what is it? Oh, I'm gonna miss it.
Recoup. It's recoup.
Yeah, Recoup.
Yes.
Oh, wait, but Recoup has
It does have
flashback.
flashback.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter
Right?
because the Doomsday's exiled.
Yeah, oh, true. Yeah. Damn.
Yeah, so
Brostorm,
Grenzo,
Selvala, where it's
yeah.
like turn 1 Land Dork, turn 2 Selvala, turn 3 try and win the game was the idea every time.
Badisi.
Mono Black
Yeah.
Sidisi.
Vanifar.
Vanifar.
Show my own deck.
Oh, if we're doing that, fucking brawls.
Godo has been for the longest time just a all-in, try to win as fast as possible deck, but recently has been transitioning away from that out of necessity to kind of adapting to the meta, and I think that's good.
Yeah.
As Morgan said, we're looking back. We're going time machine.
Is
So
is
just
Brawls old
nothing
enough
but-
yet? I think it is.
I mean, I think the current meta is very hostile to sort of decks that are like the fast decks that are often referred to as glass
The
cannon.
ones that we have mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These kinds
Plus
of
the
decks.
others that-
There's just
yeah,
the
too
decks
much
that you don't see
interaction.
too much anymore.
Farm decks as well. Farm decks sort of maybe less so, but still definitely fall in this category in my opinion.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I feel like the difference between farm decks is that they're kind of always lethal. They don't really run out of potential as the game gets
Because
late.
of Timna.
I think farm decks, it very much depends on how you pilot them. Like what category they fall into.
Yeah.
They can very easily be played a little bit slower, like Timna every game plan, or ad nauseum as soon as possible every game plan.
But yeah, like those would be
Yes.
like considered the classic glass cannon fast combo decks, right?
yeah, and I think
Yeah.
they contribute to what defines the format to be the fundamental turn and blah blah blah, and why casual players
And I
will
think-
say, oh, every just trying to end the game as fast as possible.
And I think some of the classic Goldfishing spreadsheets from those also influence a lot of what people think of as the top speed of the format, right? Because that was sort of I don't know, for me at least, I don't know about you guys, but for me, I noticed that this is probably like the golden age of spreadsheets for cEDH. Everybody was keeping a spreadsheet. And a lot of the spreadsheets were Goldfish spreadsheets for these decks, because I think at the time, a lot of people thought, hey, Goldfishes are pretty good ways to compare decks. You don't see them as much anymore. I think it's a lot more of an abstract term now. I think it's I don't know. You guys might have the same
It was
experience.
definitely a bit
but
of a flash in the pan, I think, in terms of everyone was just super jazzed about getting their deck list to have the link with, I've goldfished this deck 100 times, and here's my list of all the turns, and here's my data breakdown, and blah blah blah, because for all that sweet Reddit karma, right?
yeah. But like I think
Oh my god.
Can confirm spreadsheets are a great way to get Reddit karma.
I think that was
And,
really
tapped out likes and views.
I think that's really like a reason, or at least a it's sort of a I guess it is a reason why people think the format is as fast as it is, or the reason why people think that it's a turn 3 format for like every deck, right?
yeah.
When I don't necessarily think it is, right? I think just when people use goldfishes as their base for what they base their perception of the speed of the format off of, it's inflated because obviously it's a goldfish and you're not playing against other people, but also because of sort of like the mentality of like what you're doing when you're goldfishing.
I think one of the important things is you need to distinguish between the fundamental turn of the format and when people are winning the game. Now, we just talked a lot about fast decks who are trying to win the game as early as, possible, so definitely going to be threatening wins around the fundamental turn. But I think we did a pretty good job explaining that the fundamental turn is about respecting other people and having interaction, being prepared for that. So many decks are one of the reasons why these glass cannon decks are falling out of favor is that strategies that have a solid backup plan and can survive and thrive in the long game are becoming almost essential. Like these kinds of strategy, you can't because the stalemate of interaction is going to stall the game out longer naturally, and then if you want to maintain a high win rate, you need to be able to have some sort of game plan in that instance. Because people will be prepared, unless you're getting like a turn 2 combo, like you're doing your Godo, Treasonous Ogre nonsense, or obviously Flash Hulk can combo turn 2 very easily.
Yeah, the other one.
It's unless you're not going to get away with that kind of stuff on turn 3 as easily. So turn 3 is the fundamental turn of the format, but the time when the game is actually over, that's probably much later. I'd say like, turn 5, turn 6 on average, something like that. If I was to hazard a guess.
Probably even longer depending on what the meta looks like. I mean, obviously,
Yeah, it's certainly very.
Honestly,
very
like
dependent.
I think on average, my longest games of Commander are competitive games.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we also
I've-
do play a lot of competitive games compared to the amount of casual games we play.
Well, if I look into the past as far as I can see, like
Okay, sure.
hundreds of games.
Yeah, I've definitely, my longest game was a competitive game that was like 3.5, 4 hours or something like that. That was a grind.
I played Monorath's Daxos for a while, so maybe some of my longest games were that deck. But yeah, definitely, I've had a lot of very long competitive games, like 2 hours plus.
Yeah, and in terms of the conception that many casual players have, I think it is a problem that is exacerbated by the fact that we use this fundamental term lingo among people who are knowledgeable of the format. We say, cEDH is a turn 3 format,
and sorry, just
and I think that gets misinterpreted.
just sort of to tack on
Well,
to
the
that.
term itself doesn't pack enough context.
Yeah, and it's also it's
Right,
I
like-
think it gets used a lot by people who have experienced Magic and maybe like competitive Magic, sort of like spiky Magic in general, because that term gets used in a lot of other formats as well. And I think it's maybe people in casual EDH don't necessarily have that context, so they take it to mean something different than I think what a lot of like maybe the competitive Magic community would take fundamental turn as, right?
Yeah.
So here's an interesting little thought in what's the latest possible like average goldfish you think you can have in a deck? So how quote unquote slow can your deck be and still be considered a cEDH deck?
Are we talking, when we say goldfishes, like, are we talking about sort of playing to your game plan, or literally just trying to win as fast as possible?
Just trying to win as fast as possible.
And also, what are we considering cEDH is the question here.
It seems
Well,
like
that's
I mean,
the
I think
question.
this question has an obvious answer, and that answer is Yisan.
Sorry?
I think that this question, like, I think that Yisan, any deck that can't consistently win as fast as Yisan is, I have some questions.
It's probably too slow. Sorry to say.
Like, that's a deck that is, its main, like, it really struggles to win early, and that's fine because, or fine-ish, because the idea is that you're getting disruptive pieces with your commander starting on like turn 3, but that deck, the way it wins, pushes it probably to turn 5 pretty much all the time.
Yeah,
And
Well, turn five is the there is a line that will absolutely win you the game on turn 5. So it's going to be
assuming you have a turn 2 yes on, which is a reasonably safe assumption. But
well, I was gonna say I think the average goldfish combo would be something just shy of turn 5, so maybe like 4.5 or something, 4.6.
Yeah. But
that's probably the upper end of decks that are considered cEDH, but can't really threaten wins much sooner.
Like, I guess what I would say is Yisan is the deck where, or is definitely a contender for the deck where the commander is doing the most.
Pulling the most weight.
And that's, like, if that's a deck where, like, any deck where the commander's doing less than what Yisan's doing has to be able to win faster. And there isn't a deck where the commander's doing more than what Yisan's doing.
So if you had to hazard a guess as to Muldrotha's goldfish speed?
You're super fixated on Muldrotha today, huh?
Yeah, jeez.
I think Muldrotha is a solid example of a deck that's trying to, we've talked about it being a parasitic deck.
Interesting
before,
case study. It's akin to Marin.
Yeah, it's you're trying to take advantage of the fact that glass cannon decks are out of favor and they're just not that great, so people are trying to take the games longer, and you just excel in the late game while also being able to still interact on the early turns, right? So you forgo the cheap easy wins in the early game for more consistent grind out wins. But
I think you can classify this as Muldrotha is a deck that's trying to win last.
Yeah, for sure. It's trying to win when everyone else is out of resources. But if I haven't done this because I don't think it's a useful experiment, I suspect that if I was truly going deep and potentially made a couple, like, I recently added a bunch of planeswalkers that are sort of dead in that sort of scenario. If I wasn't doing that, I think that I could still get a lot of turn 4s, and like most of the other ones would be turn 5, and these would be like terrible. These would be like, I'm gonna tutor the pieces and then just LED out Muldrotha and then win from there.
Hope I don't get my shit exiled. Yeah.
So like this is jamming LED into having done nothing to prevent myself just dying to being interactive.
And even then, you're probably looking at like a 4.5, 4.7.
I bet I think it would be closer to 4 than 5. Like, it's just not that hard to find the pieces. There's also the Razaketh, so like it's not that hard to entomb reanimate Razaketh. It's not that hard to find. Like, if I could find intuition plus LED and cast them, like, that's a win.
So I think the important takeaway from the discussion on Yisan and Muldrotha is that it's not winning, being able to consistently goldfish, turn 3 does not a cEDH deck make. It's about being on a plan, for having a solid game plan and route to win the game, and being able to interact with other decks in the format that have not necessarily the same plan, but that do have a plan. So you need to be able to interact and prevent their plan while advancing your plan. And
starting
if you can
on turn
effectively
3
do that
consistently.
Yeah.
You need to have reasonable access to a win condition. Not necessarily on turn 3. You just have to have a reasonable access to a win condition, and then also be able to do something to, like, actually do stuff on turn 3.
So we did talk about how the goldfish number itself isn't a sort of be all end all in terms of, is a deck cEDH, is it a quote unquote fast deck? We talked about First Sliver, maybe not necessarily being it being a fast deck, but not necessarily being glass cannon. But in terms of goldfishing, I know Reed, you had some things you want to say about it.
Yeah. I think it's just important to talk about, I think, to continuously keep discussion on goldfish around, because there are a lot of goldfish numbers around and just lying on the floor, and just lying around on deck pages and whatever. I think when people
do consistent turn 1.5,
when people check out deck lists or look at old deck lists, or when other misinformed people use Goldfish as a reference, and more misinformed people, or uninformed people rather, listen to the misinformed people. I think it's very easy.
Yeah, what's the number actually?
It's very easy to pick up a number that looks like a very empirical number, and it's a number with a digit and then a period and then 3 more digits, and it looks very fancy. It looks very mathematical.
You can't just use them as a direct comparison to say one deck is better than the other.
And that's the big thing that I'm trying to get at. And I'll get a bit deeper into it. I'll provoke some more discussion, as is classic. But yeah, the idea being that like you probably shouldn't be using Goldfish as the empirical standard to judge a deck on in effectively any scenario, really. Except if you're in specifically an argument about hypothetical fastest wins in decks in a vacuum. Aside from that, it's really not useful to use them as direct comparisons between decks, because like decks play counter magic. Well, like some of the fastest decks in the format play counter magic and removal and play like actual things. Even
and that's why Flash
lightning Druid, which is like not a great deck, but also like specifically built to be fast, is still playing like Pact Negation and Mental Misstep and stuff, right? So like it's just like people are gonna play cards that lower their Goldfish because they're good cards. So as soon as it's just like as soon as you're playing cards that don't increase your Goldfish, it stops being really a useful point of comparison in a vacuum.
Yeah, I think some important things to note are that, as you were pointing out, people include cards to increase their Goldfish, and that is not necessarily going to improve your deck or your win rate, which is the best metric we have for measuring the relative power of a deck, is win rate, which unfortunately is something that is really hard to get a really nice statistic for, because player skill factors a lot into your deck performance, and also the sample size is very low.
It's really hard to get a game against the average pod is the issue here.
And it's it's so easy for people to kind of cling on to something like the Goldfish number, because there are no other easily almost scientifically obtained
close pseudo-scientific
quantifiable. But I mean, you can come up with a set of criteria for a Goldfish. Just Goldfish it 100 times, 1,000 times, and you're gonna get a number, and the procedure can be followed rigorously. But the problem is that the number isn't super useful.
Yeah, you're not studying the right phenomenon, no matter how rigorous you are in your study.
The more rules you put on Goldfishing procedure, like generally the more removed the Goldfishing number becomes from actual gameplay is the issue here.
Yeah, and people are just very eager to have some sort of quantifiable number, or some sort of way to quantify the power level between decks.
Or rather,
they want some way to say that their deck is definitively better.
I will clarify that statement because I know that Morgan's getting triggered in the background here. Give me a second. It's not that it's not that adding more criteria, more restrictions to how you play out Goldfishes will remove it from reality, but there's a trade-off there. If you add more restrictions, it's not going to be applicable to any deck lists aside from that specific deck lists. And if you remove them, then it's harder to quantify between decks, and it removes it from the original game.
Fair.
I also think that the Goldfish number is kind of came out of like a weird like community competition type situation 100%. Where it really takes one person to be like, this deck is consistently winning on this turn, for other people to be like, okay, well, my deck has to have this property, right?
It's like
because it's so easy to gravitate towards, as we've mentioned, like digestible things like numbers. I think Goldfishing truly is truly useful, and exactly not determining how fast your deck can win. Like, I think the valid data to gather in a Goldfish is how effective or how unified your game plans are, rather than
That's actually a great point.
I mean, yeah, I think also one thing that it's a little more useful for, it's a little more useful as a lower bound,
Yes.
where if you're like goldfishing a deck and you're going like, okay, even trying to win as fast as possible, I'm really having a lot of turn sixes here.
That's
Like-
the really, yeah.
That's an indication that maybe your deck is not viable if it's incapable of consistently winning. Like, abandoning play patterns, if you can't consistently win on, let's say turn 5 on average, by abandoning your normal play patterns, then that means that your win cons are just too inaccessible.
Yeah, that's a fair
And
point.
also the whole thing. Sorry, I'm just gonna get into this because this is something that I've always wanted to discuss because it makes me a bit annoyed because I've noticed that whenever I goldfish decks in the past, there was never really a set way to quantify this. Is that no goldfish? I noticed that no like goldfish number ever will ever have a a whiff rate percentage next to it. Nobody ever includes the, oh, and by the way, I couldn't win the game in like 10 turns in X percentage of the games that I goldfish this in, right?
I mean,
They kind of boil it down to a number. It'd be much more useful to see the full distribution.
Yes. People will.
yeah. I'd like to see.
Oh, sorry.
continue.
Yeah, it was just more like, so you goldfish like 100 games, and you might have pulled a number out of that to get your average goldfish of 3.75 or whatever, but you didn't actually tell us how many of those games you like mulled to 3 on, or how many of those games you just absolutely whiffed on and just marked off as, oh, these are like turn 5 wins when you're actually not getting there like ever, right?
yeah. I mean, it's certainly that would be nice to know. I think in a lot of decks, it's not like if you play 100 games and then 2 of them you just get wrecked. Like you keep 2 lands in a dork and your deck's like, oh, you wanted more mana? Yeah, too bad. Then, like, if that happens 1 in 100 games or 2 in 100 games, chalking that up as a turn 5 inflates your average by 0.02 turns or whatever the math works out
Yes,
to.
but I've definitely
But
definitely seen goldfish numbers for decks where there definitely should have been a note beside them or a marker beside them saying this is definitely not as consistent as it may look.
Yeah, certainly I think you have to be rigorous with your mulligans. Like, I think that it's very easy to not count. It's like, oh yeah, I went to 4, okay, we'll write that one off and start the next one. But that's something that if you're going to come up with a number, you have to have honest mulligans.
So, anything else?
Yeah,
to
I'd be
say
curious
about-
to see kind of. Yeah, sorry. I'd be curious to see, an average goldfish win, in addition to, a breakdown of the distribution of remaining cards in your hand, or just remaining resources. Like, okay, I'm winning consistently on turn 3, but I have a complete one complete open mana of, generally speaking, my best colors, and also either a counter spell or a removal spell, for instance.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see with, these are the percentages of wins I had with counter backup. If I had, and sometimes instead of just being like, oh, I could have gone for the win here, so this is the turn that I'm going to mark down on my spreadsheet, saying like, some way to encapsulate that data point, as well as the fact that, well, I could just wait one more turn and have it be a protected win.
Although I
I
think
think that's also quite useful.
when you talk about waiting a turn and having it be a protected win, that also gets into, like, that's a thing where I think a lot of people when goldfishing don't realize how sort of inaccurate their play patterns are. It's not just, I had ad nauseum and would I have just run it out on turn 3 versus would I have waited for an opportunity? It's also, would I have tutored ad nauseum or my dark ritual on turn 2 if I knew that I had 3 opponents, 2 of whom were on blue, and like, so I think
do I tutor ad nauseum or do I tutor Sylvan Library?
Yeah, like I
Those
think that
kinds of things, yeah.
It's important not just to look at, like, when you look to go off, what if there was interaction, but also how the possibility of future interaction affects ideal play patterns for your deck.
Basically what we're saying is...
Yeah, a Sylvan Library is certainly more effective than an ad nauseum if your ad nauseum gets countered. Draws you way more cards.
Dude, that's why I run Spell Snare.
Dude, Spellstar gets so much.
Don't tempt me.
Dude, it gets tainted.
So is there anything else to say about goldfishing, or should we move on?
Tangentially related is also just when... I think if you looked at honest goldfish numbers, there are very few decks that have more turn 3s than they do turn 4s.
I would also like to agree with this.
But the other sort of interesting thing is that in... Like, when we talk about the fundamental turn in cEDH, you might think, well, then shouldn't it be turn 4 and not turn 3? You have 3 opponents, and so, in a way, the format is faster than the decks, because if every deck had, let's say, a 30% chance of being able to go off on turn 3, then of the 4 decks in the pod, there's basically a 75% chance that one of the decks could go off on turn 3.
Which is definitely
That's an
something that I
important point.
wanted to touch on, and just like sort of compare that to maybe the difference of why cEDH would be different than a 1v1 format in this way, and why you have to take that into context is in 1v1 you're only looking at your opponent, right? And you're only dying as fast as your opponent's going to kill you. But in cEDH, like, yeah, everybody, like, maybe you have 2 opponents that are not doing that well, but you're just going to die to the other one. So it can be very, very easy to look at how often you personally die in a game of cEDH, and then apply that to saying, well, the fastest decks in the format always kill on this turn that I'm consistently dying on, which is not true. The fastest decks in the format may only be killing you on that turn a third of the time, but there are 3 of them in the pod, so one of them's going to get you, right?
Yeah. Now, I think we've been musing on all these theoretical aspects and definitions and sort of the philosophy behind fast decks and format speed. But let's get into some actual practical advice that we can, or so some practical takeaways that we can give our listeners. And so, let's talk about how card choices are affected by the speeds of the deck in a given format or meta. So, we've kind of identified the fundamental turn as turn 3. So how do our listeners take that information and translate that into evaluating cards or improving card evaluation, maybe picking better cards for their decks, improving their decks, blah blah blah. Anyone want to take on this?
Sure.
By the horns.
Yeah, I've got one point to start it off. I think when you're choosing cards for your given deck, and you're considering your metagame, the most important thing is to consider: are you under or over representing the turn of your format, or the turn of your metagame? So if you're up against a lot of slow decks, are you over-representing dealing with the slower decks, which simultaneously would compromise possibly being more proactive on earlier turns, or the opposite? Are you too low on your disruption that you really can't handle a slow deck, depending on your metagame?
Morgan, did you want to jump in with something? Or?
Yeah, just one of the things that I have sort of noticed specifically is when you, like, in this format in particular, when you look at like the cost of cards, it's very difficult to play non-disruptive, non-game winning 3 and more cost cards, but like 3 in particular is if you look at a lot of decks, it's like, okay, what 3-drops are they running? Okay, these 3-drops are very impactful. And like people are sort of, there's a lot of cards that would be very reasonable to run at 3 or 4 mana, or like seem like they should be. But you don't want to put them in your deck because when you tap out to play, an example I often use is something like a Raminep Excavator. Like if you tap out to play that, you will get punished. Or if your plan is to tap out to play that, you'll get punished for that
You're
plan.
gonna die.
Yeah, a big thing that you can sort of look at to see the massive difference between 2 and 3 drops is the pervasiveness of Dark Confidant and just how low down the list something like a Phyrexian Arena would be.
Which is
yeah, even
like,
in non-Tymna decks where you don't actually care about the body.
Phyrexian Arena is sees a single copy of play on the entire database, right? If I'm not mistaken. Which is like shows
What-
you,
what,
which would be
what
like
deck am I
Nat,
familiar?
I believe. I think exactly
Oh,
Nat.
It's not
Okay,
in.
yeah, I can see
It
that.
might be in Food Chain Gonti as well.
Oh, sure.
Wouldn't shock me.
Yes.
Yeah, classic Food Chain Gonti. But yeah, I think in terms of evaluating cards and, piggybacking off what Morgan was saying with the CMC, you need to sort of lay out what you're doing on each of your turns and just lay out a rough idea of approximately what your deck's going to be doing on each of these turns. And obviously it gets much harder, to project, what am I going to be consistently doing on turn 7? Right? It's like, first of all, is the game going to get to turn 7? But then the more cards you draw, the more mana you get, the more options you have. It's hard to say for sure what you're going to do. So turn 1 Dork, pretty easy, pretty obvious. If you're non-green, turn 2 Signet or Talisman, or just some kind of mana rock, pretty easy, pretty obvious. So when you get to turn 3, how much mana are you going to expect are you expecting to have? And for most people, I think that's probably going to be 4 mana. And obviously that varies with the quality and types of mana rocks you have, or what you're going to be doing on your second turn. If you're in a green deck, are you going to develop mana more? But let's just use a non-green deck as an example. Your turn 2 Signet, untap, play a land, 4 mana. Spending 3 mana to do something like develop a Phyrexian Arena leaves very little options because there is not a whole lot of very, very strong cards on 1. I mean, pretty much all of them get played, right? So you've got your Ponders, your Preordains, your Tutors, but it's also hard to
Remoras.
Remoras, but it's your protection and things that you can threaten. So if you want to develop your game plan with a 3 mana spell and then hold up some sort of interaction, your options get limited very quickly.
Yeah, you can
You've
definitely.
got your creature removal and Chain of Vapor and some weakish counter spells.
You can definitely punish people who hold up 1 mana because they're restricted. They basically have to use free counter magic for artifacts and creatures. Like you have Swansong and Flusterstorm.
Yeah.
I guess you can spell pierce artifacts sometimes,
Technically.
but Swansong, Flusterstorm, Dispel, and the occasional spell pierce. And if you play a creature,
What none of that represents? Yeah, exactly.
whoops,
Delay. None of that represents delay, counterspell, mana drain. I am jamming Gitrog into that
I
so
may
easily.
cast a card that starts with A and ends with Adamy Rector. Academy Rector into that. Yeah.
Oh man, you got to, I had so many ways of countering non-creature spells, and you just had Academy
had it.
Rector.
But so then, kind of, why aren't things like, so this kind of explains why things like Phyrexian Arena aren't going to see play. But so then why wouldn't things like, I mean, there's so many strictly better college cards. I'm going to say, why isn't Cancel seeing play?
No, we gotta go with
There's
the better ones.
obviously lots of-
Exclude. There you go.
Yeah, exclude, sure. But yeah, why
Wasn't
aren't
disallowed
these?
being played, or
Yeah, there's some forbid.
Frozen Grip,
Whoa,
actually, that's a good one.
buyback. Frozen Grip is not a good
What?
one.
It's a great
There
example.
is so many better functional but yeah, so why doesn't 3CMC interaction see much play?
Well, because again, I think like you have to, once you get to 3 mana, you really have to be like considering cards that aren't necessarily cards that are situational. You want to be playing cards in 3 mana that are progressing your own game plan and are doing it very, very efficiently for the mana cost, and are having a very high impact on the game. So when you get to playing 3 mana interaction, you start playing these, and not even really getting into the fact that you have to hold up 3 mana, which is like, bleh, I don't want to ever do that. But just the fact that you have these 3 mana cards in your deck that aren't necessarily guaranteed to do anything, even if your game plan goes 100% to plan, and you're hitting all your marks, the 3 mana interaction still isn't guaranteed to do anything. Your opponents may not just play anything into the interaction that you want to use it on.
Yeah, so that's I'll go with that. So I think my theory for this is based a lot on how often are you time walking yourself? So if you're playing your Phyrexian Arena and holding up your crappy interaction, or you cast your Phyrexian Arena and you don't have the interaction because there's so few of it. If something happens, or you're basically time walking, or you're saying, I'm gonna just let other people deal with whatever goes on, so I can get my board developed a bit. Now, if you're gonna do, instead of looking at proactive cards, you're gonna look at defensive cards, or reactive cards. You're kind of in the same boat, where it's really hard to squeeze in on the fundamental turn something that both advances your board state while also being able to threaten the interaction. Right? So if you've got 4 mana on turn 3, you could develop a Dark Confidant and hold up a counterspell and / threaten flash. Right? Now, yes, I suppose that if you're in Sans Green, you could go turn 2 Signet into turn 3 Signet, holding up a 3 mana in piece of interaction. But, relying on double Signet or double Signet into Talisman or any of those combinations is not the most reliable game plan. So a lot of the times, if you're committing yourself to holding up that interaction, you're not going to have something to develop your game plan. And then if nothing happens, if other people just spend their time casting, are you going to waste I'm saying cancel again, because
Exclude.
Are you really going to cast a cancel on someone's on someone's Raminap excavator?
Dude, are you
Probably
kidding me?
not.
You used a creature instead of a non-creature? Come on.
Like, are you really gonna do that? So while they're gonna develop all these, or a Dark Confidant, that's just such a low value target, right? No one's gonna jam openly into your interaction. So you really want to be doing both. You want to be developing your game plan and threatening interaction with your opponent's game plans. Otherwise, you are going to fall behind so fast.
Yeah, holding up a lot of mana doesn't feel great, and you want to avoid doing it as much as possible. Ergo, don't play expensive interaction.
I think also with 3 mana interaction, the upsides it has over 2 mana interaction. I mean, first of all, pretty much none of the 3 mana counterspells are actually better than Mana Drain. But even if we look at counterspell as our baseline, you can do a lot more useful things with 1 extra mana on your turn than the scry 1 you get from Dissolve. And like, the reason people play 2 mana interaction over 1 mana interaction is because all of the 1 mana interaction is restricted. And the 2 mana interaction that sees play is typically quite unrestricted.
Yeah.
Well, all the ones that can counter creatures that also counter non-creatures do see play.
Is that true?
Like,
Well, no. Okay, not all of them. Like,
I
Memory Sturdy doesn't see play. Arcane Denial doesn't see play, but for the most part, anything that even approximates Counterspell sees play.
I'm still not sure that that's
Here's an interesting
true,
question.
but we'll glaze over it.
would one blue counter target spell draw a card cEDH play?
I was thinking of saying the exact same
Of course,
thing.
I feel like we've been working
like,
towards this the entire episode. This question is the locus of everything we've been working toward.
dude, this is a culmination of this entire podcast.
I have a follow-up question that I think is actually more interesting, though. Which is...
Would you play
how many would you play?
No.
How many more
You
copies
have
of
the
Literal Counterspell?
choice.
Oh, no,
You have
hold
the
up.
choice
We have to answer
between-
the first question. Come on. Okay.
All right.
I would play it. I would
No.
play it in Brawl because you would play it anyway in Brawl. You play Cancel in Brawl. Or you play Disallow. I'm not sure if you play Cancel.
You play a couple cancel... Like, cancels with
yeah.
upside.
I might play it in 4-color Ashme.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't... I don't think I'd play it in 4-color Rashmi. I could see it in color-restricted decks.
Okay, and now you're...
I think I'd play that card in
you
exactly Brawl.
Now, here's the interesting follow-up question just about upsides versus extra mana. If you had the option, would you rather counterspell for a single blue or blue counter target spell draw a card?
Depends on the deck. For Shuffle, I'd take the Counterspell for 1 mana because that's nuts.
I think...
I mean, they're
almost
both
every
They're
deck
both
would
nuts.
take-
So the mana efficiency matters to me more in aggressive decks.
I think about this. How many decks don't run mana drain? Right?
Some.
2.
Do you run mana
No.
drain and shuffle? Like
Talking to the hard
counterspell
person
for
here,
one blue
noobs.
though. Counterspell for
Yeah.
one blue. I don't know. I think
I'd
that makes
jam the
the
shit out
case
of Counterspell
pretty.
for one blue.
Like note every deck that currently runs mana drain would also run counterspell for one blue.
They would also all play
But
Counterspell with a draw
They
attack
would also,
combo.
yeah.
yeah, but I'm saying that the decks that don't currently run mana drain, all of them probably would run counterspell for one blue.
Right. Okay, is
So-
there a deck where you would prefer the double blue counterspell that draws a card?
In multiple, yeah.
Yes, I think you can come up with decks where you'd prefer that for card advantage reasons, but I think just in terms of sheer playability, that for a single blue counterspell is the more playable one. Although
Really?
this is a weird
not
thing to get
sure.
bogged into.
No. Let's get bogged into this. We have time to kill. I really, because I really think that like in like everything and like okay, Shaper, I know you're listening to this. Don't get angry at me because we've already had this. We've already had all of this over Banadrid and Dovin's Veto. Aside from playing it in Shuffle, which I'm not sure that I would, I think I would play Counterspell with draw tacked on over 1 mana Counterspell in probably every other deck that I play or have played.
I think like it obviously makes sense in things like 4-color Rashmi that are very concerned
I think
about
I would-
card advantage.
I mean, that list includes Momir, which is certainly not like
I would
4-color
play it
Rashmi.
in, I would definitely play it in Momir.
Really, you'd play that over
Yep.
1 mana counterspell. Okay, I'll defer to you on that because I don't think I would.
I have to go through and check the blue list that I play. God.
Like I wouldn't run double blue draw a card counterspell over 1 mana counterspell in Zur.
I think that might be the other one that I wouldn't play it in. I think
Like, would you play that in like Cass? Is
not so in
obviously
Cass.
like,
I think
drawing
actually
a card. But I'm saying even still in Cass, you're trying to win the game. You'd want your 1 mana blue counterspell because if you're recasting from your grave or something,
In
you're trying
Cass,
to
I'm
resolve
definitely
something,
playing
like,
the cantrip counterspell.
Yeah, I think Kess is a very blue deck.
I think
Zur
specifically,
is less blue,
I think I
for
would
sure.
only play the 1 mana one over the cantrip in Shimmer. I'm not sure that I'd do it in either Consult or even necessarily Doomsday.
Shimmer lists are all consult lists now, man.
I mean,
They're all
Zero
converging.
consultation.
All the decks
Come
are
on.
converging.
Be reasonable here. Work with me.
Sure. But yeah, now we're just getting
That's what the
stuck in the
people are
weeds.
here for.
I think if I was Goldfishing a deck, I'd
Yeah,
want
there
the
you go.
1 mana counter spell.
No,
Really?
What? No, you want the kid?
I think if I was a goldfish,
You want
I
so
would live in a
so that you
castle.
can counter your own thing and draw a card. In Goldfishing, gotta dig more.
Right. Yeah, that is true.
Let's
That's the
move
Taigam Arcane
on.
Denial special.
Okay, I have one more point against the 2 versus 3 mana interaction. What in my mind, what stands out about 2 mana interaction is it covers at least 3 turns, where a 3 mana interaction pretty much only covers 1. And I'll go through the examples. So turn 2, you can tap and cast a 2 mana interaction spell. Turn 3, you can tap and cast a 2 mana interaction spell, and you can do something with 1 mana. Turn 4, you're looking at a 2 mana interaction spell and possibly a second 2 mana interaction spell because you have your mana for it. And generally speaking, like I think there was kind of a centralization on like interaction always working, but I think in cEDH it's a bit more complex. Like a single interaction spell, especially past the X turn, is not good enough.
You're definitely not safe.
That's why,
Yeah.
that's why I think 2 is just so much more powerful. Even at a diminished effect, is because it can be paired with the second one, and it's also effective on more
Like
turns.
it's sort of like in reference to the speed of the format, right? Is it like the 3 mana one, along with all that, just like it hits just too late?
Okay, now for everyone's favorite segment, gut check.
Check your guts, folks. Just your belt.
Check one. Let's get
Gut
yeah, thanks. There we go. Get the check. Okay, so if your life was on the line for a tournament of cEDH, what deck would you bring? And does your answer change if it's only one game? Boom, 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 boom.
Okay, I have my answer to the first half at least.
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm ready.
I think I'm ready.
All right.
Ready?
Multiple decks or multiple
You good?
rounds. I'll lock it in.
Okay, cool. Let's
Wait.
let's-
It's a deck name and a Boolean response, right?
Yeah, for sure. Wait. No. Deck name Boolean response,
And if yes, then something
what
else.
you would-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Okay, Matt, what's your answer?
I'd bring the first sliver and no.
Interesting. Morgan.
Sacred Hulk and yes, Breakfast Hulk.
Also,
Reed?
Sacred Hulk. Yes. Peanut butter and jam.
And then for me,
You're gonna have to remind me.
Shuffle Hulk, and if it's only one game, I bring Gitrog.
Do it for the boys. Do it for the server. Gotta rep them.
I think
Little will take the L. We'll take the L for the server.
more like I think that my odds of a single game playing out is probably just my familiarity with the deck, and I would even consider it for the tournament.
I guess maybe I should take a Thrasios Tymna deck because it
No,
will
you're
be
good.
the last deck
do it.
game I ever played Magic, and I may as well at least play that
Hulk goes
combination
cold.
once.
Yeah. Okay. So before we wrap it up, let's get in some listener questions. So Meepomatic, of course, all-star listener question asker Meepomatic asks, with the meta shifting heavily towards stacks or slower, more resilient decks, could there be an opportunity for faster all-in decks to capitalize? This is really on topic for this
Fantastically
episode,
on
isn't it?
topic. So topical. Meep is the MVP.
Okay, so Meep the best. Keeping this show
Keep it
alive
fresh.
with these listener questions. Yeah. So, what do you guys think?
I'll let other people go first, but I have sort of a mixed response.
Sure, I'll go first then. I think that there really isn't room, or there isn't really an opportunity for faster all-in decks because the quality of interaction that stops a fast deck is present in a slower stacks deck.
Yeah, I get that. I feel that actually.
Retweet. I
RT,
kind of subscribe to that as
like.
well. If the decks that are built, if the meta being more slow does not mean they're not running the interaction, as Matt said, that's going to stop the faster decks. So you're only just going to get wrecked when the games go along, and unless you're able to really back yourself up, which a lot of all-in glass cannon decks can't do, you're not gonna cut it.
Actually, I like to add one condition, which is I don't think there exists a deck that has that property. Like there could theoretically be a new deck, a new commander, a new strategy, new combo that lets you do it, but there doesn't exist. I don't think there exists
Revolt.
that type of deck
Revolt.
as it stands. Yeah.
Please, no, never, never.
So I agree that I don't think there's an opportunity for the sort of glass cannon decks that we were talking about earlier, like the Grenzos and the Salvalas, to come back. However, I do think, somewhat slightly tangentially, I do think there is a bit of a meta opportunity for a little bit more greed, like where you on turn 3 you don't go for the win, but you look to play a card that like can potentially represent a win over the
You just
long
fucking
term, and is
slap
just
a dino on the table.
not quite scary enough to warrant a counterspell from somebody
So-
else. Yeah, like, I mean, Thran Dynamo is probably on the lower end of that echelon, but like
No,
Smothering
not Dynamo.
Tide certainly.
Like, the dino.
What?
Dude, Labman
That too.
pass.
Yeah, dude. Fucking Runic Armor Sword. Let's go.
Dude,
Oh,
literally
the
pulled that
dino.
shit.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, stuff like that where you're like on turn 3 you're saying, okay, I'm going to play something that's good and represents a lot of advantage over the course of this game, but doesn't represent me winning
So what
right
you're
now.
s-
Has an opportunity
So
to
what you're
end
saying
games. Or like to win
Is
games
that we
for
should
you.
all switch over to playing 4-color Rashmi, but without counter spells and just with more Phyrexian arenas?
Oh my god.
I guess what I'm saying is playing
That's
down
what I'm
every
taking away
game
from
is
that.
pretty
I'm gonna go test it out tomorrow.
So one thing I kind of want to just piggyback off this question as well is what meta is good for
Sorry,
all in
can
class
I just get
cannon
my
decks?
my two? That I did have an actual 2 cents
you're-
on this,
you're-
not just
yeah, sure.
memes. Although that's the majority of my opinions at this point
Okay.
in time. I think the issue that you're gonna have with trying to get under the interactive decks right now is that the reason the interactive decks exist is because there's already a thing on the bottom end of the spectrum that's getting under them right now. And the thing's called Hulk. And it's really good. And it's really good at getting under things. And I don't think you're gonna get it. I don't think you're going to get under the control decks better than Hulk is going to get under the control decks. Necessarily. Personally.
Well, I think
Yeah.
so the one potential case, and like again, this commander doesn't exist, but like I'm picturing, Vanifar with an extra color, basically. Is that
Vanifar with haste.
sure. Either one of those works.
Godo with blue.
No, essentially just
oh god,
that's essentially just that there are weaknesses you can attack in the interaction that people are playing. Creatures is a very notable one. The number of counter spells that actually hit creatures is quite limited, and burning Force of Wills on creatures is
Not a great time.
definitely never a good feeling. So an all-in deck that only had to use non-creature spells and potentially sort of front-loaded in the way that Vanifar does, where the hard part is not actually the combo turn, the hard part is playing Vanifar the turn before and having it live, is almost a better strategy than trying to do everything all at once.
So Silvala.
No, because
So I
Silvala,
should
you very
hard-cast my
much have to
Razaketh.
resolve a bunch of spells
Yes.
on your combo
Yeah.
turn with Silvala. In a way
So-
that you don't. Like, if you let the first Vanifar activation resolve, oftentimes you have already lost.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that the issue right now is like there's nothing that sufficiently gets under both non-creature counter magic as well as like Graven Hulkate. Yeah,
Hulkate.
is the big one, right? Is like to match Hulk speed, typically you have to go and play effects. Like the way that you're getting
You have to make a
the way that
deal
you're
with the
getting
devil.
close to Flash speed without playing Flash is by playing cards that also lose to the same things that Flash does for the most part. Like you're still losing to the Grafdigger's Cage for a lot of these effects. So like you just it's so hard to match the speed while attacking on a different axis or a meaningfully different axis for that case.
Yeah. Now, instead of talking about, just all hypothetical commanders that could fit this criteria, what about the current glass cannon decks that do exist? What kind of meta do they thrive in?
Other glass cannon decks.
I don't think that there is a stable meta that they can thrive in.
Yeah, I think the metas that they do best in are low blue metas,
Which are
on blue
not
deck.
stable for the most
Perhaps.
part. in my
New
opinion.
undeveloped formats.
No, but I think like we've sort of moved. If you look at even like the Hulk decks from like where they are now from where they were shortly after the unban, they've come up with just such like they can pile through a lot of stuff, they can win at instant speed, they can deal with drawing their Hulk pieces, and they still have room for like an ungodly number of interaction spells. And I just can't see a meta where playing Selvala is better than playing Thrasios and Timna Flash Hulk. So, or like a meta where that is a stable equilibrium that can be reached.
I think
Yeah,
like
fair enough.
one of the ways that it happens is you get a bit too many frog players in the meta, and then you just start
was
jamming
gonna say
Grenzo
that, man.
games
It's-
because you just get way under them.
Gitrog is a very popular commander, and that is one way where you're going to be able to get your glass cannon decks to shine. Is if there's lots of frog decks, they do not interact. Well, it does depend. They can interact with artifacts and enchantments through, Assassin's Trophy, Abrupt Decay, Nature's Claim, Natural State, that's a kind of standard package, and Cost of Caterpillar as well.
And that's not even necessarily more than the average deck is playing for like removal anyway. Yeah.
No, but I'm saying, yeah. So if you're trying to be glass cannon on, resolving something like an artifact or enchantment, maybe that's not the best one. But if you're like a deck that's mostly in on a creature, like Godo can be glass cannon, but it also dodges. Helm the Host dodges 2 out of those pieces, so it's not that bad. But yeah, so if there's lots of frog, glass cannon is not the worst strategy.
But I think that there are better
That's
strategies than
yes.
glass cannon if you're in a meta with a ton of
Yeah,
frogs.
But come on, Splee, we gotta give them something. We're not discussing what the best decks for
Yes.
those metas are. We're discussing if glass cannon exists in those metas, and the answer for that is yes.
Yeah, the best meta for glass cannon. Yeah, and that's that meta. Okay, and our final listener question: what cards do not have reasonable financial replacements? And so this is from listener. This is a Patreon listener question from our IRL friend Tom. We play Magic with him quite
TOMTG.
frequently.
Yeah.
TOMTG.
So, I mean, I'll kick things off with the most obvious one: Time Twister. There's no.
Is that
to be
even the most
fair-
obvious one?
To be
But I
fair,
feel like that
with
does
the
have
Pretty
a
of Narset's
reasonable
reversal, it
financial
actually sort of
replacement
does.
In like exactly scepter, like
Well, no,
dual
'cause if-
scepter things.
Like, there's nothing that does Twister
at the same rate, yes.
that does
Yes.
everything that Twister does at the same rate. Yeah,
There's-
it's a loop piece. It's a wheel for comboing with Narset, Notion Thief, dump your hand, cast an early Twister. Like, nothing does that, but you can get decent budget replacements for either aspect.
Either aspect, but not both. Yes. Like,
I mean, Echo of Eons.
Echo of Eons is the closest, or
Time
like
Spiral's probably
that
closer.
one with.
I think Echo of Eons is a very good replacement, but then you consider that a lot of ad nauseum decks have to run
You
Time
also
Twister,
consider
and
that
then
it
you
costs
realize it kind
6
of all folds in.
mana. What are you doing?
But first you discard your hand of
Sorry.
the Lion's Eye Diamond.
Sorry, Reed, you said something else was a reasonable replacement, and I didn't know what it was.
Spiral's with the idea is
Spiral.
with the printing of Narset's Reversal. If you're using it for Spiral effectively functions in it's hard to get off the ground and cast it on like turn 2, but it's reasonable as like a similar wheel effect. And it also functions in the loop role as well with infinite mana now with Narset's Reversal. So it fills it.
It's financial replacement in a relative sense.
Not an absolute sense there. That is still not a cheap card.
Like, I think that also another way of looking at it is, like, I don't think that I would run Time Twister Time Spiral in any deck just because I was cutting the Twister.
You would be
Like,
playing the Spiral
I'd
anyway,
rather-
is the point. Yeah.
in mono blue
Yes.
decks, I guess.
Funnily enough, you can
I don't
also
think-
say that cards that don't have reasonable financial replacements, a lot of it is going to come down to efficiency, right? Like Grim Monolith versus a Basalt Monolith. Like if you're willing to spend the extra mana, like you can get those effects. Now, so there's lots of like easy slam dunk answers, I think, for these kind of questions. Like there's no really good replacement for Chains of Mephistopheles or Bazaar of Baghdad and Gitrog. You just like you run whatever else you can, but you're not trying to emulate that effect. But I was gonna say an interesting answer might be something like Mana Crypt. There is nothing that is gonna do what Mana Crypt does, other than Soul Ring, which is already budget enough that
Really
you're gonna
just
be
like a
playing
lot
it
of
guaranteed.
the fast mana stuff, right? Because like those are all like fairly objectively like just like design mistakes that like just never really.
I mean, there's also like cards with novel effects like Survival.
Okay,
of
well,
the
okay,
Fittest,
Survival of the
before-
Fittest, Lion's Eye Diamond.
Academy Rector, I
that's
gotta get
the
out there before it gets named because that was mine. But I knew you guys were getting there. I'm not gonna let it get named before I can get it out.
Dude, what if I use it with Arena Rector
Get
and
your
then
gun
I
and just
find
fucking
the
go for it. Just
Tezzeret,
keep
which
going.
finds
Dude, you get Liliana's Dreadhorde General and just fucking get back your Hulk with the down tick and you just keep
nice.
going.
Yeah. Hell yeah. But yeah, so a lot of it is just efficiency. Like you need to maintain a certain level of efficiency in terms of your cards that you're going to include in your cEDH deck, and unfortunately, a lot of those costs big monies. But you know what doesn't cost big monies?
Printer paper.
Proxying cards are playing on cockatrice.
Oh, I thought you were about to. I thought it was like, oh, did we finally get an affiliate link with someone?
Oh my god.
What doesn't cost big money?
Amazon, if you're
if you head over
you're
to-
listening.
Get 10% off of your
MeUndies?
Bazaar
Yeah,
effect.
yeah.
We know you want duels, but come to GP Las Vegas with us.
Actually, duels is an interesting one where in some decks they very much do have replacements, and in some decks they don't.
Yeah.
Like the most notable.
Everything except High Tide. Like,
I mean, even not necessarily. Like I think even in Kess Consultation, like I mean, I obviously play High Tide in my Kess deck, so it's particularly relevant to have islands. But in Kess Consultation, there isn't a like not having specifically Volcanic Island is a real problem in terms of what fetches get and like how you can use your fetches to get your access to your colors. Like enemy color duels with your primary
Yeah.
color are very important for consistency because then your fetches are just like
Yeah,
your
your
red fetches are
duels
just
in-
offline basically once you find
If you're playing good old Brea World
Oh,
Gorger
yeah.
combo, you gotta
have the
have
duels.
them duels, man.
Oh my gosh.
So I think that about wraps it up for this episode. If you guys would like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at Into the North Pod, via our email intothenorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite link for which can be found in the description for this episode. Extra special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work towards improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a patron, we are at patreon.com/Into the North Podcast. As always, thank you to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, to Nate Slover for our equally lovely podcast logo, and to our podcast editor, Roadkill. You're sick, dude. Thanks.
You're so sick, man.
Yeah. Next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Until then, see ya.
Bye.
See ya.
Have a good one.